Hello, welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Mary Wakefield, and we're here to discuss the rise of ADHD and indeed whether it exists at all. I'm with Peter Hitchens and the author Kat Brown. Kat, if I could start with you. You've written a book, It's Not a Bloody Trend, in which you discuss both your own diagnosis and the phenomenon of rising ADHD. Could I ask you, what were your symptoms? What led you to believe that you had ADHD, not just something that was part of the normal human condition?
Well, I suppose part of the reason that I didn't realise that it could be ADHD until the grand old age of, I think I was 38 by that point, was that all my symptoms were part of the human condition. It's just they were all the time. I suppose chronic, if you like. And also there were so many of them that I sort of felt greedy or defective or stupid or just that I was, I don't know, somehow humaning wrong, if you like. So also one of the reasons that I didn't actually remotely think that it could be ADHD was because I was doing all right. Like I worked at the Times for a reasonably long period of time. I worked at the Telegraph. I had lots of, lovely titles on my CV with the obligatory redundancies that sort of went along with them. But everything just felt, I don't know, I just felt like I had to try about 5 times harder than everybody else. And I think that was a sort of key thing. And I don't mean in the sense of, life is hard. I'm starting out on a very competitive and demanding career. There was just always something jangling in the back of my mind. And the ways that I usually dealt with that was with alcohol, food, shopping. When I was a teenager, self-harm. And I'd sort of periodically go to the doctor and if not get a diagnosis, then be treated for, I don't know, depression, anxiety, insomnia, all these different ways that things sort of showed out. And then later something called binge eating disorder, which hadn't even been categorized until I think about 3 years before I trotted off to the Maudsley. There were just all these things, just too much all at the same time, I think. There was that film a few years ago, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And I honestly think that's the best summary of how I can possibly describe it.
Thank you, Kat. And Peter, you've written for a long while now saying that you don't think ADHD as a diagnosis is real. Can you respond to what Kat said?
Well, it's not that I don't think it is, it's that it isn't. I am used to being abused and shouted at. Indeed, I've been insulted by experts and I'm really almost immune to it. But the subject on which I've received most abuse is on simply stating the fact. There is no such thing as ADHD or its cousin ADD, and for this I will only read out one thing during this discussion, and it's from the final statement of the panel from the United States' National Institutes of Health Consensus Conference on ADHD, which was held on November the 18th, 1998, and they concluded, "We do not have an independent, valid test for ADHD, and there are no data to indicate that ADHD is due to a brain malfunction." So what you have here is an admission reluctantly made and subsequently largely suppressed, but actually made at the time, that the thing called ADHD is entirely subjective and has no objective existence, like many of the complaints listed in the American Psychiatric Association's great book of mental illness, which is also full of similarly subjective things, but it just isn't there. There are the things which are described as symptoms of ADHD are subjective, and they're often experienced by people other than the person who's supposed to have it, particularly when this vast industry began, when it was applied to children who were having difficulties with school or whose parents found their behaviour hard to cope with. And many, many people, the reason for its extraordinary power in the human mind is that a supposed diagnosis of ADHD relieves both the person who's diagnosed of responsibility, and in the case of a child, his parents and his teachers from responsibility too. It also provides other opportunities to people who want to sell and give drugs to them. I'd have no objection to it at all if this treatment of it was Indian head massage or long cross-country runs or anything of that kind. But the prescription of powerful drugs, which are either actual amphetamines, Class B drugs in normal circumstances, subject to a 5-year prison sentence and unlimited fine for the mere possession of them, or very like amphetamines. That's what really worries me about it, that there is an objective physiochemical treatment which is given for something which has no objective existence.
Kat, could I just ask you, I think you've said you've tried all sorts of things to manage your symptoms, like running and sort of swimming and things, but it was the medication which helped you most. Could I ask what medication, and have you found there's any side effects?
Sure. I mean, I'd love to say that there was a magic pill, and there categorically isn't. It has taken me probably 4 years since I got this diagnosis of trying different medications and different structures of medication as well. It's definitely not like, oh, here you go, here's the pill, and off you pop. So at the moment, I take a sort of fairly small amount of an instant release medication, which is a stimulant. And then I take a non-stimulant medication as well, which almost acts as the bedrock, if you like. And then I take a beta blocker for anxiety symptoms, and I take a small amount of antidepressant because I've had cyclical depression for years. Ironically, with the ADHD medication, remembering to take it and remembering to reorder it is probably my biggest challenge. But I think the main way that I would describe it is that if I do remember to take these meds, and that is absolutely in conjunction with therapy and with behavioural strategies, it's definitely not a sort of, here you go and everything's fabulous like in an advert. It's just almost like a load of tabs in my brain closed down. So just the operating system of me, if you like, just becomes that bit clearer to navigate. And it also means that I'm not, using quite a lot of other fairly negative ways of sort of making my brain behave as I used to. As I mentioned, alcohol, food. I drank a ton of coffee. I mean, everybody says they drink a ton of coffee, but caffeine is understandably quite popular with people who have these sort of ADHD brains. But I also just wanted to address to Peter that I'm really sorry that he does get shouted at, because it's not something where shouting should happen. The title of my book, It's Not a Bloody Trend, was more a sort of comfort for the people reading it, so they could hold it up to themselves as well as any relatives or other people that they find perhaps not necessarily being that supportive. But ADHD medication has been used in children since the 60s. And if we want to look at how successful it is, we can fairly ironically look at the number of successful lawsuits in America about it, which are incredibly minimal. That's a ridiculous way to sort of look at it, but the famously litigious medical lawyers in the States will find something wrong, and with ADHD meds, they just don't. But it's very important that everything is monitored, and that is, that's why I have 6 monthly catch-ups with my psychiatrist about my medication. It's definitely not something that I can just, pop over to the chemist and pick up with minimal hassle.
Peter, if the medication's helping and has no side effects, what is the problem with prescribing it?
Well, who says it has no side effects? I mean, I don't know what the drugs are which we've just heard described. I don't think we have.
Was one of them Ritalin or Adderall or anything like that? Can
Any
we
of
ask
them.
Kat, what are the
You
drugs?
can't get Adderall in the UK,
Okay.
which is annoying because apparently it's, actually one of the smoothest acting and doesn't sort of make you feel all jolty. There are absolutely side effects with medications, but that's more, I think, particular to the person taking them. So when I first started, I tried a number of different medications, actually none of which I think have the sort of popular names that we understand from American TV, for example, just partly because English healthcare tends to go by, the sort of fairly boring chemical name rather than anything else.
Could we ask
I remember being really excited to be prescribed one that I thought would really help with my binge eating, which is basically bulimia without the purging. Sorry to be so graphic, but unfortunately it didn't at all, and I had some fairly negative side effects to it. So I came off that and went off something else.
Could we ask what the drugs are? Because then we could figure out if they had and what side effects they did have. Are they
I don't particularly want to go into particular names, just
Okay.
because I don't think that's particularly fair for people that go on very successfully. But as
Yeah.
I said, I take an instant release stimulant medication, a sort of longer release non-stimulant medication,
Yeah.
and then my antidepressant and my beta blockers. And then, when I remember to actually eat well and sleep well and everything, that is also a huge part of my treatment, because there's a lovely phrase that I think Professor Susan Young, who co-founded one of the first adult ADHD clinics at the Maudsley Hospital in the 90s, said, which is pills don't teach skills. And lovely to be able to be given a pill. Ironically, the beta blockers probably do most in instantly doing something helpful, and that they make my heartbeat calm down when everything's going a bit crackers. But alongside the meds, you do need to have coaching and you do need to have therapy, particularly as an adult, if you're being diagnosed later on. And that's not therapy in the sense of, oh no, poor little me, blah, 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 blah. But it is to sort of come to terms with, what your life could have been like if you'd known why you found particular things challenging, why your relationships, your friendships, work were just all more chaotically seeming so than perhaps your contemporaries were.
Well, I struggle here because I make an objective case. I say, if this thing exists, then establish for me what its physical symptoms are and explain to me how you diagnose them. And there is no, say, objective diagnosis of them, and there never has been. And the other thing that I say is that if you look at the side effects of the kind of drugs which are given in many cases for ADHD, then they're very often amphetamines or very similar to amphetamines, drugs which are regarded and have been regarded in our society as extremely dangerous to people for many, many years, which is why, as I say, without a doctor's prescription, an amphetamine in this country is possessing it is a crime, carrying quite heavy penalties. So we have to start from that. It certainly has side effects. If you took an amphetamine, then particularly if you were undertaking some tedious but demanding task, like revising for an examination in a subject you didn't much like, you'd find it very helpful in aiding your concentration to do that. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that's what amphetamines do.
Yeah.
But they charge, as everybody who takes them for any length of time discovers, they charge quite a high physical and mental price for doing that, as all drugs do. So that would not be a surprise. The question is, how do we justify this? This began, as I say, very much with the mass drugging of children in the United States, and then to a lesser extent in this country. It also tends to carry with it, they're not invariably, quite substantial payments to the people diagnosed or to their families.
Yeah. So there's an incentive on
there's an
parents
incentive,
and
but
schools.
The most powerful incentive is to be told there's nothing wrong with you. You behave like that because you have a physical ailment which can be treated in some way with a pill, and that's good for the person who takes it because it makes them feel that there's nothing wrong with them, and it's good for their parents if there's a child involved, and it's good for their teachers if there's a child involved, and that's one of why it's very, very difficult to criticise. And I'm very grateful that I haven't been shouted at on this occasion, but I have been, and the hostility which talking about this engenders is great. I've written about it many times, but I find that generally when I do, in other newspapers or even in my own, almost immediately legions of people will line up to denounce me for having said what I've said, with arguments which I don't regard as very good. So, as I say, I make an objective case, and it can't be answered by a subjective one. And I would point out that if I had been growing up in the age of the drugging of children, I would almost certainly, as a child, have been diagnosed, as the word is, with an alleged complaint known as ODD, which stands for Oppositional Defiant Disorder, which I have to this day.
Yes.
And one of the things I have it over is over the drugging of children. We've all agreed in the past 20 or 30 years that smacking children is a terrible thing which we ought never to do. And yet at the same time we've licensed the mass drugging of children with drugs which, when given to adults, would be illegal. I cannot see how we can square that with our conscience. We spend all our time denouncing our forebears for doing terrible things, but we never look at the awful things which we do, which future generations will examine and say, how on earth did they do that? I think the use of drugs to treat alleged ADHD will, 40 or 50 years from now, be viewed with astonishment by our descendants.
Peter, do you think that it's a way of parents to relieve their guilt at not parenting properly, perhaps controlling their children better or feeding them less sugar or whatever it is.
It can be. Yeah. I mean, there must be, who can doubt it, there must be children who have had, through birth trauma or some other reason, or some childhood disease, have been affected in some way which makes them behave badly. There must be such children. There must be other children, on the other hand, whose upbringing has affected the way in which they behave.
Yeah.
And that upbringing, of course, has been carried out by the parents, who don't particularly like being told that they haven't done a good job of it. None of us do. But there it is. The fascinating thing about ADHD is that so many of its supposed symptoms are to do with the interaction between the child in childhood ADHD and adults, particularly teachers.
Yeah.
And also, one would add, family life in the modern world is pretty awful for many children. Very little exercise, very little time outdoors, an awful lot of time spent on screens. And schoolwork, it seems to me, when I examine what children have to go through now, fantastically boring and repetitive.
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me that they kick up. And to deal with this by saying, oh, well, there must be something physically wrong with the child, give it a drug, seems to me not merely to be mistaken, from the point of view of the child, but to be a grave social and political mistake.
And it would affect...
refusing to recognise that there may be something wrong with the way we're bringing up our children and teaching them.
Yeah,
just to interject there, if we're talking about giving children drugs, I was given Epilim when I was 10 because I had petit mal epilepsy. Would that have... Are we sort of judging all drugging of children by these standards? Because it's not like we're going around pouring ecstasy into, I don't know, Sunny Delight or something and handing it out to children. We're treating children after diagnosis. Also, Peter, just to go back to an
Could I just answer the first question first?
About objective understanding.
Could I answer the first question first?
90s, and I would just really, I'd honestly just love to direct you that we've had 2 consensus statements on ADHD in the last 20 or so years, first in 2002, then updated in 2021. Honestly, if you would like objective, properly peer-reviewed, and very interesting, actually, history and status around ADHD, then this is a statement approved by 80 authors from 27 countries, 6 continents, and endorsed by 366 people. These are not just randomers on TikTok going, do you know what, I'd love to just make ADHD a trend or something like that.
No.
Also, ADHD and ADD are the same thing.
It's fascinating.
It's just the name is changing. We're going back to something that was first identified in scientific literature in 1775.
No, we're not.
And in children by the chief paediatrician in the UK in 1902.
These
something people don't fully understand.
These are separate
because
things.
Can we? Psychiatry and psychology, they're sciences that have barely been around for 200 years. We are in a new frontier. But, as a formerly, drugged child, I really just need to interject on that point.
Peter, could you answer the
first question, as I understand it, petit mal epilepsy is a physical manifestation which can be observed.
Kat, you can observe.
Can we not observe the symptoms of ADHD?
Well,
given that we can go back
to
a medical
physical
symptoms in 1775 and very clearly see symptoms that are, used in diagnosis now.
If you'll excuse me,
I'm trying to
answer a question. I can't answer it properly.
I do really appreciate Peter's presence here as almost emblematic, if you like, of somebody in every single person's life who will be like, I don't believe it, it's not real.
I think we can all agree, Kat, it's extremely important to discuss this, and your questions are very important. So if Peter could continue to address the questions you posed, that would be wonderful. Peter?
I would like to repeat the point, which I don't think Kat has answered, that a petit mal seizure is not a subjective symptom. It is an actual physical event, observable, measurable and present, and it's not comparable to the vague and subjective list of characteristics which are given in the supposed diagnosis of ADHD, which varies in time and also varies according to whether it's supposed to be present in a girl or a boy. But the other point that you make about the alleged attempts to tighten up what the consensus conference way back in 1998 said still haven't resulted in there being a recognised physical objective test for the presence of ADHD in the human frame. There is none,
On the note
there is.
in
I haven't
1978,
finished.
I was
There is.
doing my
I haven't
GCSEs.
finished. If you wouldn't
I'm
mind.
41 now.
Okay.
Things have changed.
I have
Science
finished.
has come on. Research has developed since then.
But it
would
hasn't,
be
though.
awful if I went through my life going, well, I need to go back to what I scored in my GCSE English paper because that is all that stands and true.
So what's the physical test for? So what's the physical test? The objective physical test for the presence of ADHD in the human frame now? What is it? And how? And
Well,
where? And how? And, how, and where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it given? Where is it given? I'm still talking. And where is it given? And to whom? By whom?
Okay, fine. After the
exist,
90-minute assessment that I had with a psychiatrist, I then had to go and ask my parents for my school reports or a contemporaneous support of ADHD symptoms in me as a child. Because I was 38, we did not have my school reports. So then I ended up having something called a QB check, which basically channeled that. What I do want to say is that something I really understand being very challenging for many people is the fact that this is, if you like, an invisible illness or an invisible condition rather, because it's chronic. It's not something that just sort of comes in or out like me and my cyclical depression or anxiety or something there. And brains are difficult. You know, it's not as simple as, I don't know, I had a hip replacement 2 years ago. It was very evident on an X-ray that I had, you know, an arthritic hip and we needed to replace that ASAP. It's not as simple. I suppose actually a physical comparison, if you like, would be the fact that my husband and I can't have children. And before I gave up drinking, before I had my diagnosis, we had 2 rounds of IVF that failed. And obviously this was a very physical thing. But the explanation that they gave us was unexplained infertility, which is just, I mean, that's a nothing diagnosis, right? That's not a physical reason. It was just something where they basically were just like, we just don't understand
in the fact
about
that
this,
you
right?
can't have
And fair enough,
children.
because again, IVF, fertility treatment, that's only been going really since I was born for like the last 40 odd years. So I think we do all need to have an element of humility in this and go, we know as much as we can for now, hence going back to more recent consensus statements, if you like, because you don't just want to take one person's point of view. You don't just want to take my point of view, for heaven's sake. But we do want to sort of look at a big bank of science done by people who are really embedded in these fields and also, you know, hopefully don't have any, I don't know, ulterior motives.
Well, science is about objectivity and testability and experiment, and that does not support your position. And that is and just there are quite obviously people who have interests, as we've discussed some of them, in maintaining the belief that there is such a complaint, and there are other people who obviously have such an interest, who are the people who sell the drugs. So it can't be described as some sort of neutral, wholly objective kingdom of the mind in which this matter is discussed by people with no axe to grind, can it?
Peter, does it worry you about the fact that the industry is estimated to be worth something like 40 billion in 2030, about the fact that there's ever more incentives not to question what ADHD is or to examine it more, but to keep on diagnosing it?
It worries me immensely because there are huge interests behind this.
Yeah.
And as I say, I've been arguing against the prescription of drugs for people who believe they have ADHD for many years. I can do it. I'm free to do it.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is that it's almost impossible to get beyond the pages on which I write.
Yes.
To get anybody to discuss it, have a major debate.
And why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it is because of the desire of people to believe, and people who often have ended up in influential positions in the media, the desire of such people to believe that it is true.
Yeah.
The ones we've discussed.
Do you think it's sort of sunk cost fallacy? The more you buy into it or don't question it, or the more you prescribe, the harder it is to actually say, hang on, maybe this was all a bit of a mistake in most cases.
Well, it certainly gets, yes. But then again, you have similar areas of enormous argument, the other one being about antidepressants, whereas a brilliant doctor such as Marcia Angel can write enormous essays in the New York Review of Books, completely opposing with forensic fact most of the claims of the current antidepressant pill manufacturers and the prescriptions given, and she says it and it vanishes.
Yeah.
You can still find it, but it has no effect, because so many people, again, in modern society, take these pills and believe that they have a valuable effect for them, and therefore
so
they're not interested in hearing
It's a snowball effect. The more pills people take, the more they don't want
I
to
think
look at
so.
it.
I think we have been since the 1960s. A society very dependent on drugs, both illegal and legal, and this has been one of the greatest social changes we've undergone. So if people want to do this as adults, well, then to some extent, there's a straightforward J.S. Mill argument that they don't harm anybody, just about okay, though I'm not sure what effect it might have on their friends.
Limited funds in the
and
NHS.
families. But in giving such things to children who have no real choice and who are told this is good for them seems to me to be a rather more profound ethical question.
Kat, do you worry at all about the size of the industry, about the amount of companies making this amount of money, and that there may be an incentive to diagnose more easily?
Well, I mean, this is the global pharmacology industry full stop, isn't it? I mean, the cancer industry at the moment, sorry to call it the cancer industry, but it's estimated in 2022 to be about worth $147 billion. And that's estimated to reach $507.68 billion by 2034. That's simply the growth of the pharmacological industry. However, to say that we're going around drugging children, and that's something that only happened since the 60s, people have been sedating themselves, trying to seek escape since the very beginning of time. I mean, you only have to look at a Hogarth painting,
but that's themselves,
see how
not their
people
children.
used alcohol, and that is a drug. The point that we're giving children dangerous medication and forcing it on them and all that sort of stuff. It's happening with a prescription, and these dangerous medications are being used because they have a very particular impact on a very particular type of brain. I absolutely agree that people are misusing speed or amphetamines and that sort of things, particularly students, if they want to, focus on an essay. I mean, Johan Hari, the disgraced former journalist turned absolute non-fiction grifter, has written at length previously about how he bought black market smart drugs, if you like, to help him concentrate on his work and his studies. 'Twas ever thus. But to suggest that people are, going around drugging their children, I mean, frankly, I could find drugs more easily through Instagram, WhatsApp, or, I don't know, an app like Signal, than I could going through a psychiatrist, sorry, not a psychologist, and through my, my NHS health provider, where I have a shared care agreement.
Yeah.
They're not just randomly popping them out like Smarties. Would that they were, and even then we'd probably all forget to take them. 2
points. I think cancer research can show huge, measurable advances in the treatment of that disease, and it can show them objectively. And secondly, however much it's put down to prescription or anything else, a child is not really in a position to resist the advice and belief of adults that child should take a drug. And the child simply isn't truly free to reject the drug in the way that an adult is.
I think that's a very good point, and I think we can all agree on that the bigger the industry grows, the more care we have to take with giving it to children, at least. Peter and Kat, I think we have to wrap it up there, but
just very quickly, tap water, because we have literally been drugging children with fluoride for years, just so that they don't all have rotten teeth. For goodness sake, at some point, children are being drugged, and it's okay.
And we should be very careful about the effects of fluoride and keep a scientific eye on how that affects children.
Should we put Ritalin in the water too, do you think?
Well, I think we're going...
That's actually a brand name. That's not the chemical name.
We're going that way.
We know what it means.
Anyway, Kat, thank you very much. Peter, thank you very much indeed. It's been very interesting.